Hey everybody, hope you're doing good. We're continuing our reading of the Sword of Allah. We are picking up where we left off, and that's on page 114. We were dealing with the siege of Taif. Salman next decided to use a testudo. A testudo was a large shield, usually made of wood or leather, under which a group of assailants could advance to the gate of the fort, safe from enemy missiles, and either crash through the gate with a battering ram or set fire to it. So that's what it's called, a testudo, huh? Oh, okay. Clever. Under the instructions of Salman, the Muslims constructed a testudo of cowhide, and a group of them advanced under its protection to set fire to the wooden gate of Taif. As they got to the gate, however, Malik and his men poured red-hot scraps of iron into the testudo. Well. Okay, so under the instructions of Salman, the Muslims constructed a testudo of cowhide. So their testudo was made of cowhide. And so they went to go forward and they needed to set the gate on fire. But they got to the gate and Malik decided to dump some red-hot iron on their testudo they made that was made of cowhide. These pieces burnt the testudo and terrified those under it, so that they hurriedly dropped the unfamiliar equipment and ran back. As they ran, the Saqif fired a volley of arrows at them and killed one of them. Well, that's a disaster. But I mean, you got to drop the testudo and run. I mean, it's going to catch fire. It's going to melt on you. It's terrible. 2 weeks passed, and the end was not in sight. The Saqif would not come out to fight. So they're just staying in there. Roose Bolton in Game of Thrones was like, oh, we got time for a siege. And then the Blackfish was also ready for a siege. There's a lot of examples in history where some people know, well, you can just wait out each other's patience, right? There's a lot of that versus sending in a small group, a large group, doing diplomacy, doing outright extermination. There's just so many different methods. But it appears here that the Saqif are choosing to stay behind their walls. The Muslims could not get in to fight. Every time they approached the town, they were driven back with arrows. One day Abu Sufyan also took part in a sally towards the town and stopped an arrow with his eye. He lived thereafter as a one-eyed man. Oh, wow. Abu Sufyan, huh? He only had one eye after that. Well, at least you get to live losing an eyeball. February can be very cold in the region of Taif, and the weather during the siege was unpleasant. So, notice how the Muslims are having to endure a siege during unpleasant weather. I remember when Stannis Baratheon in that example, he's like, oh, we have to fight in winter's coming. Caesar in the Gallic Wars had difficult sieges as well. You couldn't necessarily call it a siege every time, but they're camps, right? They're in enemy territory. They're staying there. They're starving. They're hungry. But it's pretty brutal, the weather, right? The Muslims tried to force the Saqif out to give battle by destroying some vineyards near Taif, but the Saqif refused to leave the security of their fort. Malik was much too clever of a general to risk a battle under conditions which would favor his opponent. So they come out, they destroyed the vineyards, so they're going to be damaged with some trade. So it's not a bad idea to take the vineyard, right? But it's not their main crop. Remember when Caesar went around taking the crops and they would torch the fields after they were done? And that was a lot different. Here it's like they're doing a different method. Finally, the Holy Prophet called a council of war and sought the advice of his officers. One of them said, when you corner a fox in its hole, if you stay long enough, you'll catch the fox. Oh, eventually they're gonna poke their head out, right? They're gonna get stir crazy. They're gonna start going nuts. They can stay in there and be as long as the fear is pulsating kind of through them. But there comes a mode where people are like, I just want out. Interesting, another Game of Thrones example is when Theon Greyjoy goes on behalf of Ramsay Bolton to tell the his former pals to let go of Moat Cailin. And some of the soldiers in there are like, no, we're going to stay out. And then once the general gets told, well, the captain, whoever he was, gets told that there's a moment where they can sue for peace, one of the other soldiers takes a cleaver, whacks it in the dude's head, and says, oh, does it say on this paper that if we surrender we can leave? And then eventually Ramsay flays all of them anyways. He tricked them to let go of their position. But that was an example of how, yeah, you can wait it out, but how long can you waiting it out? Get it? Before your psychology starts to turn and morph. So, just like that fox, you can run in, but coming out is going to be the hard part, right? If you stay long enough, you'll catch the fox, but if you leave the fox in its hole, it does you no harm. Abu Bakr advised a return to Mecca, and Umar concurred with him. The Prophet could not wait indefinitely for the fall of Taif, as he had more important matters to attend. He proposed that the siege be raised and the army returned to Mecca, but some Muslim hotheads protested against this, and insisted that they fight until victory was gained. So some want to stay and fight. He's like, hey, you gotta stay and fight. Then you can attack tomorrow, said the Prophet. The next day, a few of these battle-hungry Muslims again approached the fort with a view to capturing it, but were severely punished by the Saqif archers. So these archers ain't giving up. They're picking people off. They fired a volley of arrows. Remember, they killed one when they got the Testudo burned. They were on the walls, remember, that they picked off when they set up their camp a little too close. And again, the archers are firing their arrows. So throughout the whole part of here on this page and the last page, it's really solidified the point of the Saqif archers' ability to really get that bullseye. They returned in a more philosophical mood and agreed with the Prophet that it might be best to leave the fox in its hole. That's clever, right? He's like, they had time to clear their hot heads. They went the philosophical mode. They came around to the reasoning and understood that maybe we just gotta leave the fox there. That's funny. On February 23rd, 630, the 4th of Zikad 8 al-Hijri, the siege was raised. The Muslims had lost 12 men and the large number had been wounded. The Saqif remained defiant. 10 months later, however, this tribe was to accept Islam and prove staunch in its faith. Wow. 10 months later, the Saqif archers joined the side of the Muslims. After, look how they've, held off. And they ended up changing sides. There you go. The Muslims arrived at Tirana on February 26th, and here the Prophet distributed the spoils taken at Autas. To show the newly converted Meccans that there was no discrimination against them for having delayed their acceptance of the new faith, the Prophet also gave them a share of the spoils. Best good. Caesar would have done the same. Now Viking would have done the same. Genghis Khan would have done the same. Others would have been smart to ease the rigid feathers that still remain, right? But hardly had the women, children, and animals been distributed among the Muslims when a delegation of the Hawazin came to the Prophet and declared that the tribe had accepted Islam. Will you not return to us what you captured from us in battle? The delegates pleaded. Actually, they had no right to demand a return of what they had lost, because what they had lost as infidels and not as Muslims, but the Prophet was generous. That's pretty bold to be asked, like, hey, you won, but can we have our stuff back? That sounds on the surface like we would all say yes. But imagine if you had a very tumultuous neighbor, and that neighbor and you weren't getting along, and then you and your neighbor got into a fist fight, and something happened. Sometimes, they're like, okay, I agree with you now, but there's got to be a period where you're like, well, we got to trust each other and know that we're going to get past this. So it's quite bold to ask for all the stuff back. Are your women and children dear to you or your property? he asked them. Return to us our women and children, and you can keep the rest, they replied. And that's a good trade. The Prophet now appealed to his army to return the women and children of the Hawazin. Every soldier responded to the Prophet's appeal and returned the captives in his hands, with the exception of Sufwan bin Umayyah, who refused to part with a girl who had been given to him as his share of the spoils. She must have been very beautiful. Point taken. What is that movie, 10,000 BC, where there's this girl, she's got blue eyes, and they all go nuts for her? I mean, what was her name? I can't believe I just forgot her name. Helen! Yeah, Helen of Troy, right? That's one of the most famous world examples of a woman's beauty, making it like, no, I want that. And wasn't it Achilles who he got his priestess from the temple Apollo as the spoils of war? Agamemnon wanted her, took her, and Achilles got really upset, and he was mad. It was his. So she must have been very beautiful as well. There's something about it, you know. He wanted to fight for it.